The Grand Assembly Hall of the Valorian hegemony stretched for nearly 3 kilometers, its crystalline spires reaching toward an artificial sky that mimicked the purple-tinged atmosphere of the Valorian homeworld. Admiral Kethvar stood at the observation gallery, his 4 eyes narrowing as he watched the holographic display materialize before the gathered military leaders of the Galactic Coalition. 12 species. 12 ancient civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel, conquered star systems, and built empires spanning thousands of worlds. And now, they were being asked to consider admitting a 13th member, the humans of Earth. Cuthvar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. He had studied the human species extensively over the past decade, ever since their primitive vessels had stumbled beyond their solar system and made first contact with the Rilthian collective. They were an unremarkable species by galactic standards, short-lived, physically fragile, and technologically infantile. Their homeworld was a backwater planet in an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy, and their expansion into space had been laughably slow. "Fellow Admirals," announced High Commander Zethral, the elderly Valorian who presided over the Coalition's military council, "we have received the human delegation's formal request for military alliance and full membership in the Galactic Coalition. As per our protocols, their fleet admiral has submitted documentation of their naval capabilities for our review." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Nearly 400 admirals, generals, and military strategists from across the galaxy had gathered for this momentous occasion. Most wore expressions of barely concealed contempt. "Display the human fleet registry," Zethral commanded. The holographic projector hummed to life, and suddenly the center of the vast hall was filled with rotating images of human warships. Kethvar leaned forward, his curiosity piqued despite his prejudices. The first vessel materialized, a ship designated as the UES Valiant, classified as a heavy cruiser in human terminology. It was perhaps 800 meters in length, bristling with what appeared to be chemical propellant weapons and primitive electromagnetic railguns. Its hull was constructed of basic steel alloys reinforced with titanium plating. The reactor signature indicated fusion power, technology that most Coalition species had abandoned centuries ago in favor of antimatter or zero-point energy systems. Admiral Zyr'vex of the Korthani Empire burst into barking laughter, his reptilian snout opening wide to reveal rows of serrated teeth. "Is this a joke? That vessel wouldn't last 3 seconds against a Korthani patrol corvette." More laughter erupted throughout the hall. Even the typically stoic Rilthians allowed their crystalline bodies to vibrate with amusement. The display continued, showing vessel after vessel of the human fleet. Destroyers barely 500 meters long, frigates that looked like they had been assembled from scrap metal, carriers whose fighter craft appeared to be held together by hope and prayer. A grand total of 47 combat vessels, comprising what the humans called their combined Earth fleet. 47 ships, Admiral Zyr'vex of the Vel'Kroth Dominion said, her voice dripping with condescension. Her people were known for their elegant warships that blended artistic beauty with devastating firepower. My personal escort squadron has more firepower than their entire fleet. Kethvar studied the specifications more closely. The human ships were woefully underpowered by galactic standards. Their weapon systems were primitive, relying on kinetic projectiles and nuclear warheads rather than plasma lances or graviton disruptors. Their shields were laughably weak, simple magnetic field generators that could barely deflect micrometeorites, let alone concentrated weapons fire. Their faster-than-light capability was achieved through crude warp bubble technology that limited them to speeds of roughly 50 times the speed of light. Coalition vessels routinely traveled at thousands of times light speed. "I must raise an objection," Admiral Zyr'vex said, rising from his seat. The Korthani was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with armored scales that glittered like polished obsidian. The Coalition Charter requires that any new member species demonstrate the capacity to contribute meaningfully to our collective defense. These humans cannot even defend themselves, let alone contribute to the protection of Coalition space.
A chorus of agreement echoed through the chamber.
Perhaps we should show them what real warships look like, suggested Admiral Nixari of the Vendorian Confederacy. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show a Vendorian dreadnought, a massive vessel nearly 12 kilometers long, armed with plasma batteries capable of cracking planets and protected by shields that could withstand the fury of a stellar flare. The Vendorian Third Fleet alone consists of over 2,000 vessels, Nixari continued. Each of our standard cruisers outmasses the entire human fleet. What possible value could they bring to our alliance? Kethvar found himself nodding along with the others, but something nagged at the back of his mind. He had read the intelligence reports on humanity, reports that described a species of remarkable adaptability and unexpected resilience, a species that had survived near-extinction events, world wars, and environmental catastrophes. A species that had, despite their technological limitations, managed to colonize 7 worlds and establish a functioning interstellar civilization in less than 2 centuries. Still, facts were facts. The human fleet was pathetic by any reasonable standard. "We should deny their application outright," Admiral Zyr'vex declared. "Let them continue to develop for another millennium or 2. Perhaps then they'll have something worth contributing." High Commander Zethral raised a limb for silence. "We have not yet heard from the human representative. By coalition law, they are entitled to address this assembly before any vote is taken." A side door opened, and a single human walked into the vast chamber. She was small by galactic standards, barely 1.5 meters tall, wearing a simple gray uniform adorned with various insignia that meant nothing to the gathered aliens. Her hair was iron gray, cut short in a military fashion, and her face bore the lines of someone who had seen much and forgotten little. "Fleet Admiral Helena Cross," Zethral announced. "You may address the assembly." Admiral Cross walked to the center of the chamber with measured steps, seemingly unintimidated by the hundreds of alien military leaders staring down at her. She stood beneath the holographic displays of her own fleet, her face betraying no emotion as she surveyed the assembled dignitaries. "Distinguished Admirals," she began, her voice calm and clear. "I've listened to your assessment of our naval capabilities with great interest. You are, of course, entirely correct in your evaluation." This admission drew surprised mutters from the assembly. They had expected defensiveness, perhaps even indignation, not calm acceptance. "Our ships are indeed primitive by your standards," Cross continued. "Our weapons are crude, our shields are weak, our propulsion systems are slow. We have much to learn from the great civilizations represented here today." Admiral Vixala preened at this acknowledgement of Selenthri's superiority. "However," Cross said, and something in her voice made Kethvar's antenna twitch with sudden unease, "I must confess to a certain oversight in the documentation we provided." The chamber fell silent. "What kind of oversight?" High Commander Zethral asked. Cross smiled, a small, tight expression that didn't reach her eyes. "The vessels you have reviewed are our diplomatic fleet, trade ships, patrol boats, the ships we use for peaceful exploration and commerce." She paused. "They are not our warships." A confused murmur rippled through the assembly. Admiral Zyr'vex's scales rattled with irritation. "Then why submit false documentation? This is a military council. We requested an assessment of your military capabilities, not your merchant marine." "You requested documentation of our fleet," Cross replied calmly. "You did not specify which fleet." Kethvar felt a chill run down his segmented spine. There was something in the human's voice, a controlled intensity that reminded him of the way a predator spoke to prey it had not yet decided to devour. "Explain yourself, Admiral," Zethral demanded. Cross reached into her uniform pocket and produced a small data crystal. When my species first achieved faster-than-light travel, we emerged into a galaxy that we quickly realized was far more dangerous than we had imagined. Empires spanning thousands of worlds, weapons capable of destroying planets, species that had been waging war since before our ancestors learned to make fire.
She turned the crystal over in her fingers, her eyes distant. We realized that we were the new arrivals, the small fish in an ocean of predators. And so we made a decision that has guided our species' approach to galactic affairs ever since.
And what decision was that? Admiral Nyxari asked, her tentacles coiling with impatience.
We decided to never ever show our true military strength to anyone who might become an enemy. Cross inserted the crystal into the holographic projector. What I am about to show you has never been seen by any species outside of humanity. It is shown now only because we genuinely desire alliance with the Coalition, and alliances must be built on truth.
The projector hummed, and the pathetic little human cruiser vanished from the display. For a moment, there was only darkness. Then the lights came back on, and Admiral Kethvar felt his heart stop.
The vessel that materialized in the center of the hall was enormous, fully 25 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was armored in what the specifications identified as crystalline reinforced neutronium plating, a material that should have been impossible to manufacture in industrial quantities.
Weapons batteries studded its surface like the spines of some cosmic predator. Not primitive kinetic weapons, but something the computer identified as coherent singularity projectors and temporal disruption cannons. "This," Admiral Cross said quietly, "is the UEN Nemesis. She is the smallest vessel in our battleship classification." The holographic display zoomed out, and more vessels appeared. Not 47 ships, not 400. The numbers climbed higher and higher until Admiral Kethvar lost count. Carriers that dwarfed moons, destroyers that moved with impossible speed, fighter craft that registered as having no discernible mass despite their solid forms.
The United Earth Navy consists of approximately 12,000 combat vessels, Cross continued. Roughly half are currently deployed along our borders. The other half are maintained in a state of immediate readiness in concealed facilities throughout our territory.
Admiral Frexen had gone very still, his earlier mockery forgotten. That's not possible. Our intelligence services have monitored your species for decades. We would have detected construction on this scale." "With respect, Admiral, your intelligence services detected exactly what we wanted them to detect." Cross gestured, and the display shifted to show a complex network of tunnels and facilities buried deep within asteroids and moons throughout human space. "We learned early that in this galaxy, survival depends on appearing weak while being strong. Every colony ship we launched carried military construction equipment in hidden compartments. Every mining operation in our asteroid belts was actually a shipyard. Every research station was a weapons development facility." High Commander Zethral leaned forward, his aged eyes wide with something Kethvar had never seen in the old warrior before: fear. "You have deceived the entire galaxy for centuries."
"We have survived," Cross corrected. "There is a difference."
The display continued to cycle through specifications that made Kethvar's mind reel. Faster-than-light drives capable of speeds that exceeded even the most advanced Coalition vessels. Shields that operated on principles that Coalition science deemed theoretically impossible. Weapons that could tear holes in the fabric of space-time itself.
"How?" Admiral Vixala demanded, her earlier condescension entirely forgotten. "How did you develop technology that we, with our millennia of advancement, have never achieved?" Admiral Cross was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but carried clearly through the silent chamber. "You have to understand something about my species, Admiral. We are not like you. We do not have millennia. Our lives are short, terrifyingly short by galactic standards. We are fragile, easily killed, and painfully aware of our own mortality."
She looked up at the gathered admirals, and Kethvar saw something in her eyes that he had never seen in any species before, a burning intensity that seemed to radiate from her very soul.
Because we die so quickly, Cross continued, we cannot afford to wait. We cannot afford the luxury of gradual development, of cautious advancement, of measured progress. When we face a problem, we throw everything we have at it, every mind, every resource, every ounce of passion and desperation. We work ourselves to exhaustion. We sacrifice our health, our comfort, our lives if necessary, because we know that if we don't solve the problem now, we might not live long enough to solve it later.
She gestured at the massive warship rotating above her head. The Nemesis-class battleship was designed, developed, and manufactured in 17 years. 17 years from concept to deployment. Your historians tell me that the last major advancement in coalition warship design took over 3 centuries to implement.
Admiral Threxon's voice was hoarse. 17 years? That's impossible. The engineering challenges alone
were solved by engineers who knew they might die before seeing their work completed, Cross finished. By scientists who worked 18-hour days because they felt mortality breathing down their necks. By soldiers who trained until their bodies broke because they knew that failure meant extinction. She shook her head. You call us short-lived, and you're right, but you don't understand what that means. It means we have no time for complacency, no time for bureaucracy.
No time for the slow, careful deliberation that defines your civilizations. She turned to face the assembly fully, her small frame somehow dominating the vast chamber. We have been watching you. Just as you have been watching us. We have seen your empires stagnate. We have seen your technology plateau. We have seen your species grow comfortable in your power, confident that no threat could arise that you could not handle. Admiral Nyxari's tentacles had gone pale, a sign of extreme stress among her species. And yet you seek alliance with us. If you have such power, why not simply take what you want? Because power is not wisdom, Cross replied. We know how to build weapons, Admiral. We do not yet know how to govern the peace. We do not know how to manage interstellar civilizations that span thousands of worlds. We do not know how to navigate the complex diplomatic landscape of the galaxy. She smiled again, and this time it seemed genuine. These are things we hope to learn from you.
Kethvar found his voice at last. You spoke of enemies. You mentioned that you hide your strength from potential enemies. Are we to understand that you do not consider the coalition a threat?
Cross turned to face him, and he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical force. Admiral Kethvar of the Valorian hegemony, your species was one of the first to make contact with humanity. You were also one of the first to treat us with respect rather than contempt. She nodded slightly. We have long memories, Admiral. We remember our friends. We also remember those who mocked us, who dismissed us, who treated us as primitives not worth their time. Several admirals shifted uncomfortably in their seats.
We did not come here seeking charity, Cross continued, addressing the full assembly once more. We came offering partnership. Our technology for your wisdom, our warriors for your experience, our passion for your patience. She spread her hands. Together, we could accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone.
High Commander Zethral rose from his throne, his ancient limbs trembling. Whether from age or emotion, Kethvar could not tell. You speak of partnership, yet you have demonstrated that you are capable of crushing us all should you choose to do so. How can we trust a species that has deceived us for centuries? You can trust us, Cross replied, because we are showing you the truth now, when we could easily have maintained the deception forever. You can trust us because in the century since we made first contact with the galaxy, we have never initiated hostilities against any species. You can trust us because every species we have encountered that treated us fairly has found us to be reliable allies and generous trading partners. She paused and her voice hardened. You can also trust that we will destroy any species that threatens our existence or the existence of our allies.
Completely, utterly, without mercy or hesitation. This is not a threat. It is simply a statement of fact. We do not start wars, Commander, but we end them.
The silence that followed was absolute.
Finally, Admiral Nexari spoke. The Vendorian Confederacy has had disagreements with the Korthani Empire in recent years. Minor territorial disputes, nothing more. She glanced at Admiral Threxon, who glared back at her. If we were to accept this alliance, and if conflict were to arise between us,
Then we would remain neutral unless attacked, Cross interrupted. We have no interest in your internal disputes. Our alliance would be defensive in nature, mutual protection against external threats. She looked around the chamber. And before you ask, yes, we are aware of the darkness.
Every being in the chamber stiffened. The darkness was never spoken of openly. It was the great secret of the coalition, the reason why 12 competing empires had put aside their differences to form a mutual defense pact. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim, something was stirring. Something that had consumed entire civilizations in the distant past. Something that the oldest records of the oldest species spoke of in whispers and terror.
Our deep space observatories detected anomalous readings roughly 40 years ago, Cross said. Patterns in the cosmic microwave background that matched descriptions in ancient texts we acquired from various sources. We accelerated our military development accordingly.
You knew, Zethral breathed. You knew about the darkness, and you built your fleet to fight it. We built our fleet to survive, Cross corrected. The darkness is simply the largest threat we've identified. There are others, the Void Harbingers, the Crystalline Collective, the machine consciousness of Sector 7742. We've prepared contingencies for all of them.
Admiral Kethvar felt a strange emotion welling up in his chest, something he hadn't felt in centuries of military service. Hope. Against the coming darkness, even the combined might of the coalition had seemed insufficient. But if the humans were telling the truth about their capabilities...
I have a question, he said, rising from his seat. Your ships are formidable, perhaps the most formidable I have ever seen. But ships alone do not win wars. Tell me about your warriors.
Cross's smile returned, and this time it was almost predatory. I thought you might ask. Computer, display marine complement specifications for the UEN Nemesis. The holographic display shifted once again, and what Kethvar saw made his chitin plates rattle with primal fear. The humans called them Marines, soldiers trained for ship-to-ship combat and planetary assault. They wore armor that appeared to be a hybrid of powered exoskeleton and living metal, capable of adapting to any environment and enhancing their users' physical capabilities by orders of magnitude. Their weapons were scaled-down versions of ship-mounted systems, handheld singularity projectors, temporal rifles, devices that seemed to bend reality itself.
But it was not the technology that frightened Kethvar. It was the training data. Combat simulations that would have been instantly fatal to any other species. Survival exercises that lasted for months in conditions of extreme deprivation. Physical conditioning that pushed human bodies to their absolute limits and beyond.
And the numbers. Hundreds of thousands of these warriors. Millions if you counted the reserves and the planetary defense forces. The human body is fragile, Cross said, but the human will is not. Our Marines are trained to fight beyond exhaustion, beyond pain, beyond fear. They are trained to continue the mission even when death is certain. They are trained to never, ever surrender.
She pulled up a new set of records. These are after-action reports from our conflicts with the Vexari Raiders, a species that attacked several of our outer colonies approximately 70 years ago. The Raiders were technologically superior to us at the time. They destroyed our defensive fleet in the initial engagement. They landed ground forces, expecting easy conquest.
The records showed images that made even the hardened admirals turn away. Human soldiers fighting with broken weapons, with stones, with their bare hands. Civilians who had been farmers and merchants one day becoming guerrilla fighters the next.
a resistance that lasted for 8 years, until humanity had built a fleet capable of liberating the occupied worlds.
"The raiders captured our colonies," Cross said quietly. "They never conquered them. And when our fleet finally arrived, there was nothing left of the raiders but wreckage and a solemn promise that no species would ever do to us what they had done."
Admiral Zyr'vex spoke up, his earlier bluster entirely gone. What happened to the Vexari raiders?
Cross's face was expressionless. The Vexari no longer exist. Their homeworld is now a mining colony. Their species is extinct.
The word hung in the air like a death sentence.
"You understand now," Cross continued, "why we hid our true capabilities. We are not monsters, but we are not saints either. We are survivors. We will do whatever is necessary to ensure our species' continued existence, and we prefer to reserve that capability for genuine emergencies rather than petty territorial disputes."
She looked around the chamber one final time. "So I ask you again, distinguished admirals, will you accept our offer of alliance? Will you allow us to stand beside you against the threats that gather in the darkness between stars? Or will you send us away and face the coming storm alone?"
High Commander Zyr'vex remained standing, his aged eyes fixed on the rotating image of the human battleship. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "In 3,000 years of leading the Coalition Military Council, I have never seen anything like what you have shown us today. You have achieved in centuries what our species achieved in millennia. You have built a military force that could crush us all, and yet you come to us seeking partnership rather than demanding surrender."
He took a deep breath. The Coalition Charter requires a formal vote of all member species before accepting a new member. However, as High Commander, I have the authority to grant provisional alliance status in cases of extraordinary circumstances. He straightened to his full height, his posture becoming formal. "On behalf of the Galactic Coalition, I extend provisional military alliance to the United Earth Government. May this partnership bring prosperity to all our species."
A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber, but no voice rose in objection. The images of human warships, human weapons, and human warriors had silenced even the most skeptical admirals.
Cross bowed slightly, a human gesture of respect that seemed somehow more meaningful than the elaborate protocols favored by most galactic species. "On behalf of humanity, I accept. And I promise you, Commander, you will not regret this decision."
As she turned to leave, Admiral Kethvar called out, "Admiral Cross, wait."
She paused, looking back at him. "I must ask, the deception, the hidden fleet, the secret technologies, does your species truly trust anyone, or are you simply waiting for the right moment to reveal yet another layer of secrets?"
Cross was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her weathered face. "Admiral, my species has a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We have shown you our fleet, our weapons, our warriors. These are real, and they are truly the extent of our military capabilities."
She paused at the door, looking back at the assembly of alien admirals. "However, if you're asking whether we have other surprises in reserve, let's just say that we believe in backup plans, and backup plans for our backup plans. It's something of a species trait." With that, she was gone, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. 6 months later, Admiral Kethvar stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching the impossible unfold before his eyes.
The darkness had come earlier than any of their projections had predicted. It emerged from the void between galaxies as a tide of shadow and hunger, creatures that existed partially outside normal spacetime, feeding on the energy of stars and the consciousness of sentient beings. The Coalition's initial defense fleet, 300 of its most powerful warships, had been annihilated in the first engagement. Now the darkness was approaching the core worlds, and the combined might of 12 spacefaring civilizations stood in its path. Nearly 10,000 ships of every design and configuration, representing the accumulated military power of 1,000 centuries of development.
It was not enough.
Kethvar watched his tactical display with mounting despair as the shadow creatures swept through the coalition formation. Shields that could withstand stellar flares flickered and failed against the darkness's reality-warping attacks. Weapons that could crack planets seemed to pass through the enemy without effect. For every creature they destroyed, 10 more seemed to materialize from the void.
"Admiral," his communications officer called, "we're receiving a transmission from human space."
Put it through.
Admiral Cross's face appeared on his screen, unchanged from their meeting 6 months ago. "Admiral Kethvar, I understand you're having some trouble."
Trouble is an understatement, Admiral. We are facing extinction.
I know. That's why we're here.
Kethvar's hearts surged with sudden hope. You're committing your fleet?
We're committing everything. Cross's face was grim. The full strength of the United Earth Navy is currently transitioning into your battle space. 12,000 warships, 6 million combat personnel, every weapon we possess.
Admiral, I don't know what to say.
Don't say anything yet. Watch.
The tactical display flickered, then updated with new contact signatures. Thousands of them, emerging from fold space in a perfect spherical formation around the embattled coalition fleet.
And then the humans opened fire.
The Nemesis-class battleships spoke first, their singularity projectors tearing holes in reality that swallowed entire swarms of shadow creatures. Temporal disruption cannons froze pockets of the darkness in temporal stasis, rendering them vulnerable to conventional weapons. Carrier vessels disgorged clouds of fighter craft that moved with impossible speed, weaving between the enemy formations and leaving trails of destruction in their wake.
But it was not just the weapons that amazed Kethvar. It was the tactics. The human fleet moved as a single organism, each ship perfectly coordinated with its neighbors. They created overlapping fields of fire that left no gaps. They anticipated enemy movements with uncanny precision. They sacrificed individual ships without hesitation to protect the greater formation.
And when their ships were destroyed, as some inevitably were, the human crews fought on. Kethvar watched in awe as escape pods transformed into weapons platforms, their occupants continuing to fire on the enemy even as they drifted towards certain death. He saw damaged cruisers, their weapons exhausted and their engines failing, rammed directly into the largest shadow creatures, their reactors detonating in cascades of nuclear fire.
"They're not just fighting," he breathed. They're hunting." The darkness, for the first time in recorded history, was falling back. Not because it was being destroyed, though thousands of shadow creatures had already been annihilated, but because it was facing something it had never encountered before, an enemy that would not stop, an enemy that seemed to grow more determined with every loss, an enemy that treated death not as a defeat, but as a weapon to be deployed. "Admiral Cross," Kethvar said, his voice trembling, "what are your people doing?"
Exactly what we said we would do, Admiral. Ending a war. Her voice was hard as steel. The darkness has consumed countless civilizations because those civilizations eventually gave up. They ran. They surrendered. They accepted extinction as inevitable. She shook her head. Humans don't do that. We're not capable of it. It's simply not in our nature.
The battle raged for 3 days. 3 days of continuous combat with no pause for rest or resupply. Human ships rotated through the line, damaged vessels falling back for repairs while fresh ships took their place. Crew members worked in shifts, snatching hours of sleep whenever possible before returning to their stations. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn.
The darkness was not defeated. Such a thing might have been impossible, but it was driven back to the void between galaxies, back to the endless hunger from which it had come.
The shadow creatures did not flee so much as withdraw. They had found prey that was not worth the cost of hunting.
When the last shadow creature vanished into the void, the combined fleets of the coalition erupted in celebration. 12 species united in joy, sending messages of congratulation and gratitude to their unexpected saviors.
Admiral Kethvar simply stood at his viewport, watching the human fleet reform its formation. They had lost nearly 1,000 ships, almost 10% of their force, the equivalent of centuries of construction, obliterated in 3 days of combat. And yet, when Cross's face appeared on his screen again, she was smiling.
We need to talk about reconstruction, Admiral. My engineers have some ideas that might help accelerate your shipbuilding capacity.
Admiral Cross, I don't know how to thank you. Your people, the sacrifice.
We didn't sacrifice anything, Admiral. We did what needed to be done. She shrugged. That's what allies do.
Kethvar felt something shift in his understanding of the universe. For centuries, his species had viewed humanity as primitives, short-lived, technologically backward, and ultimately irrelevant to the great sweep of galactic history.
He realized now how foolish that assessment had been. The other species of the coalition lived for centuries. They had time to build, to plan, to prepare. They could afford to be patient, to be cautious, to be conservative. Their long lives made them measured and deliberate.
But that same gift of time had made them complacent. They had grown so accustomed to having tomorrow that they had forgotten how to fight for today. They had built their civilizations on the assumption that there would always be more time to solve problems, more time to develop solutions, more time to face whatever challenges arose.
Humans had no such luxury. Their brief lives made them urgent, desperate, relentless. They built their technology not through patient centuries of development, but through furious, concentrated bursts of innovation driven by the constant awareness of their own mortality. They fought not with the measured tactics of long-lived strategists, but with the savage intensity of beings who knew that every moment might be their last. And perhaps most importantly, they understood something that the ancient species had forgotten, that survival was not guaranteed, that extinction was always possible, that the universe was a hostile place that would destroy you if you gave it the chance.
The humans refused to give it the chance. Admiral Cross, Kethvar said quietly, when we first met, you said that your species came seeking wisdom from the older civilizations of the galaxy.
I did. I think perhaps we are the ones who have something to learn from here.
Cross's smile softened. We all have things to teach each other, Admiral. That's what alliance means. She paused. Besides, this was just one battle. The darkness will return eventually. So will other threats. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and none of us will survive it alone.
Kethvar nodded slowly. Then let us learn from each other. Let us teach your wisdom of survival to our ancient civilizations, and let us share our experience of governance with your young species.
I'd like that, Admiral. I'd like that very much.
The transmission ended, and Kethvar turned back to the viewport. The human fleet was already beginning to withdraw, their vessels folding back into hyperspace with the same impossible speed they had arrived. In a few hours, there would be no sign they had ever been here, except for the debris of destroyed ships, both human and coalition, drifting in the void. And the memories. The memories of a species that had hidden its true strength for centuries, waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. A species that had chosen alliance over conquest, partnership over domination.
Kethvar remembered the laughter that had filled the Grand Assembly Hall when the human fleet was first displayed, the mockery, the condescension. He wondered how many of those admirals were still alive, and what they thought now.
He suspected most of them were too busy thanking whatever gods they worshipped that the humans had decided to be friends rather than enemies.
3 years later, the Galactic Coalition formally admitted the United Earth government as its 13th member species. The ceremony was held in a newly constructed space station positioned at the exact center of Coalition space, a station that had been designed by human architects and built by a combined workforce of all 13 species.
Fleet Admiral Helena Cross attended the ceremony, though she had since retired from active command. She was old by human standards, nearly 90 years, and her health was failing. But she insisted on being present for this moment.
"It took us a while," she said in her address to the assembled delegates, "but we finally made it. We're not the youngest species in the galaxy anymore, or the weakest, or the most primitive. We're equals, partners, members of something greater than ourselves."
She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft with emotion. "But I want you all to remember something. We didn't get here by being the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. We got here by refusing to give up, by fighting when fighting seemed hopeless, by believing that tomorrow could be better than today, and working to make it so."
She looked around the vast chamber at the representatives of 13 species who had once been strangers and were now becoming friends. "That's the gift my species brings to this alliance. Not our ships or our weapons or our technology. Those are just tools. Our real gift is something simpler and more powerful, the conviction that no matter how dark things get, no matter how overwhelming the odds, giving up is never the right choice."
She smiled, the same small, tight smile that Admiral Kethvar had seen in the Grand Assembly Hall years ago. The universe is vast and dangerous and uncaring. It will try to destroy us all, given the chance. But as long as we stand together, as long as we refuse to surrender, as long as we keep fighting for a better tomorrow, I believe we can face anything.
The chamber erupted in applause, a cacophony of sounds from a dozen different species, all expressing the same sentiment: agreement, hope, determination. Admiral Kethvar stood among his people, his 4 eyes glistening with moisture. He had lived for nearly 4 centuries, and he had seen many things in that time, but he had never seen anything quite like this moment. Humanity had joined the galaxy, and somehow, impossibly, the galaxy was better for it.
As the applause faded and the ceremony continued, Kethvar found himself thinking about the future. The darkness would return eventually, that was certain. Other threats would emerge. There would be wars and conflicts and crises that would test the coalition to its limits.
But for the first time in centuries, Kethvar faced the future without fear, because standing beside him were allies who would never surrender, allies who would fight to the last breath, allies who understood that survival was not a given, but something that had to be earned every single day. The humans had shown them the way, and together they would face whatever the universe threw at them. Together, they would survive. Far beyond the rim of the galaxy, in the space between stars where light never reached, the darkness waited. It had been driven back, but it had not been defeated. Such a thing was perhaps impossible. The darkness was as old as the universe itself, patient beyond mortal comprehension, and utterly without mercy. It had consumed countless civilizations across countless galaxies. Some had been powerful, some had been ancient, some had seemed for a time capable of resisting its endless hunger. All had fallen in the end. But this galaxy was different. The darkness stirred in its eternal slumber, processing memories of the battle that had driven it back. The weapons had been impressive, more powerful than most species developed. The tactics had been sound. The defense had been coordinated and effective. But these things alone would not have been enough. The darkness had faced powerful weapons before, faced coordinated defenses, faced species that seemed for a time to be capable of resistance. No, what made this galaxy different was the small species, the short-lived ones, the humans. The darkness had touched their minds during the battle. It always touched the minds of its prey, feeding on their fear and despair as it consumed their bodies. It expected to find the usual emotions: terror, hopelessness, the gradual surrender to inevitable death.
Instead, it had found something else entirely: defiance, rage, and absolute refusal to accept defeat regardless of the odds. Minds that burned with such intensity that contact with them was almost painful.
And beneath the defiance, something even more disturbing: hope. Not the desperate, fleeting hope of the condemned, but a genuine, unshakable conviction that victory was possible, that survival was achievable, that the future, no matter how dark, could still be bright. The darkness did not understand hope. It could not understand it. Such a thing was alien to its nature, as foreign to its comprehension as light was to creatures that had never seen the sun.
But it could recognize danger, and these humans, these small, fragile, impossibly stubborn beings, they were dangerous.
For the first time in billions of years, the darkness felt something that might have been hesitation. Perhaps this galaxy was not worth the effort. Perhaps there were easier prey elsewhere. Perhaps it would be wise to simply wait, watch, learn. The darkness settled back into its eternal slumber, patient beyond mortal comprehension. It had all the time in the universe.
But so, it suspected, did those strange little beings who had driven it back.
And somehow, that thought was not comforting. In the grand tradition of human storytelling, this tale had no true ending. The threat of the darkness remained. Other dangers lurked in the depths of space. The coalition faced internal challenges as 13 species learned to work together, their different cultures and values sometimes clashing in unexpected ways.
But through it all, humanity remained humanity, short-lived, fragile, stubborn, and absolutely determined to survive.
Centuries passed. The coalition grew stronger. New species joined, attracted by the promise of mutual protection and shared prosperity. Human technology spread throughout the galaxy, adapted and improved by species with different perspectives and capabilities.
And the galaxy learned what the alien admirals had learned in that fateful meeting long ago: that the measure of a species was not found in the length of its history, or the power of its technology, or the size of its territory. It was found in its spirit, its will, its absolute refusal to accept defeat.
By that measure, humanity was the most powerful species in the galaxy.
And the galaxy was grateful to have them as allies rather than enemies.
For in the darkness between stars, where ancient horrors waited and patience was measured in eons, there was now a light that had never been there before, a light of hope and defiance and stubborn, irrational optimism. A light that said, "We are here, we are not afraid, and we will never, ever give up." The universe was vast and dangerous and uncaring. But humanity was ready for it. They had always been ready. They just hadn't told anyone. And perhaps that was the most human thing of all.